Members had 4 calls. I call up Sue Moroney.
Mr Chair. Oh,
Sue Moroney.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I was so busy calling I didn't actually hear my name being called out. Normally I would start off a call on a bill such as this by saying it's a pleasure to rise and speak on such a bill. But, Mr Chair, it's about 6 minutes since the Melbourne Cup's been run, and that I'm here at all to take a call on any bill is a minor miracle.
Who won?
But it shows the level of my commitment, and it was Green Moon who won, for all of those people who are wondering whether their sweepstakes came in or not. But look, it is important, even though it is Melbourne Cup Day, to be here speaking in opposition. And appropriate as my colleague points out that the member for Waikato is in the chair at the time, and of course that really important horse racing town of Matamata being represented in the chair at the moment. But, Mr Chair, I do want to get on to the substance of this bill, because it is really important to speak in opposition to this bill, which will take us somewhat backwards in terms of our commitment to the international issue of climate change. And we've had speakers from the government who are, today of all days, trying to convince us that they have now flip-flopped and agreed that putting health and safety ahead of profits is now an important thing for this government, when in fact it's been guilty of doing the opposite. And here we are again on the very day that they are trying to convince us that they understand now that health and safety is more important than profits. Here they are with this bill, again putting an important part of this country's future behind profits. They're putting profits ahead of the environment in this instance, and they're doing that by delaying the entry of agriculture into the emissions trading scheme. Dr Nick Smith said in his contribution on this debate that if anyone was concerned about this country's balance of payments, that they would support this bill. Well, I think he couldn't be more wrong, because one of the reasons that our agricultural industry and the products that come from our agricultural industry are so sought after on the world market is because of the clean, green image that New Zealand has, that this government is putting at risk. That is our place in the world. That is one of the niches that we have. Not only to be, we're not there because we're a mass producer of milk. We're there because we're a good producer of milk. And one of the reasons behind that is our environmental record. And here this government is putting that very important part of how we market to the rest of the world at risk with this bill. And what we know from previous contributions is that they are also dipping into the pockets of the taxpayer to make sure that this happens. They're subsidising polluters with taxpayer money, and taxpayer money to the tune of $328 million, Mr Chair. And that amount is significant, because the very day that this government announced its intention to increase the money paid by taxpayers by $328 million in order to subsidise the agricultural sector and delaying their entry into the emissions trading scheme, the very day they announced that cost, they also announced a financial veto on my bill to extend paid parental leave. Now, I think this tells us everything we need to know about the priorities of this government. They are quite happy to spend taxpayer money subsidising agricultural polluters and actually giving them another reason to continue to pollute rather than find solutions to minimising that pollution. They would much rather put taxpayer money into that than supporting families. They would much more readily put money into this area and continue that regime of pollution and risk our international reputation than to support children. And that's where the priorities of this government lie, and that's why this bill is so fundamentally wrong. It's wrong because it tells us that this government, who promised the country a brighter future, has absolutely no intentions of that. They have no intentions of delivering a brighter future, unless what they meant by that brighter future is a future full of more pollution. Unless they meant a future where our international reputation went down the gurgler.
Sue Moroney.
Unless, Mr Chair, they had every intention of the brighter future being about making sure that we actually had a country where farmers didn't strive to find solutions, that they had no financial incentive to strive to find solutions for pollution, but instead were given a subsidy by this government, via the taxpayer, to continue on their merry old ways, the merry old ways that have actually meant that we have increased and continue to increase our emissions in this country when we are striving to reduce them. And I don't know how the government MPs can stand up opposite and argue that they are committed to reducing and meeting that target that we have of a 50% reduction in emissions by 2050. I don't know how they can do that while at the same time as promoting this bill, which ensures that the sector that actually contributes the most significant amount to our carbon emissions can continue to do that unchecked and without the financial incentives to actually get their act together on this. I'm based in the Waikato area, and I know about how important this sector and its reputation is to this country. I know about how our reputation as a food-producing nation relies significantly not on our ability just to push milk out the farm gate, but that it's of high quality. And we will lose the race in holding that market position and holding that niche if we don't address these issues immediately and urgently. Not continuing along to be a follower, as the Prime Minister would have us, a close follower. We need to be a world leader, because that's the reputation that I want to see for our agricultural sector and our agricultural products in this country. World leading, because that is the market position we must fight to retain. And we will not retain that while we have measures like this that put the cost on the taxpayer while letting the agricultural sector continue on its merry old way without the financial incentives to find the solutions that we all need to make sure that we keep at the top of our game. And far from being the type of legislation that somehow protects our agricultural sector and enhances our reputation, as the government would have us believe, this legislation is actually the antithesis to that. It's actually the antithesis, because it damages our international reputation. And our international reputation has to be one of the most valuable things that we have when we're trading with the rest of the world. Now, Mr Chair, you wouldn't know that by the way that the Prime Minister in particular bandies our international reputation around as if it's some stand-up comedy routine. Some stand-up comedy routine. That's what the Prime Minister is doing in a very offensive way, offending Finland, offending Great Britain, and continuing on to make this country a laughingstock. It's no wonder that a government led by that Prime Minister has come up with this piece of legislation that will continue to damage our reputation in exactly the way that John Key goes about with his stand-up comedy routine that he might find amusing in front of a bunch of teenage girls. But on the world stage, hey, Mr Key, what I want to say is that makes us look ridiculous. Don't keep doing that with legislation like this, with silly comments like he's been making in recent times. Our reputation is much too important to do that and to be the leader in our country going around bandying this type of legislation around and making those sorts of comments. But right from the start, I think it was evident that the national government really weren't focused on our international reputation at all, because they rushed this bill through the House to meet its December deadline. They clearly haven't listened to what submitters have asked them to consider with this. And Todd McClave frowns, but I want him to go and see the forestry industry in his electorate and explain why his government has ignored the submissions that the forestry submitters from his electorate came to make to the Select Committee. I want to hear a contribution from Todd McClay to actually explain how he has gone to those submitters.
Dr. Kennedy Graham.